which would be great, but probably wouldn't help the session that much, really. So let me just start by introducing myself and saying a little bit about what the session is going to be about. I'd like to welcome everyone to this session. Can everybody hear me okay, by the way? I'm sort of started and good. I'm seeing heads nod. This session is called Advice and Support During COVID, Meeting the Challenges of Delivery. And we hope it kind of seamlessly follows on from the session earlier this morning, which kind of really addressed many of the issues I think that we're all experiencing at the moment, but certainly very much from a kind of a policy level. What we wanted to do with this session in particular was to have very much a look at the kind of nuts and bolts of delivery. And I think we're going to be joined on this session by a lot of organisations that are directly involved in delivering services to vulnerable and fuel poor households. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Peter Sumby. I'm NEA's Director of Operations. We have two Directors of Operations here at NEA. And I'm pleased that my colleague Danny Barnes, who's the other Director of Operations, has joined us in the room. And together, myself and Danny lead that part of NEA that delivers practical projects of work, always with partners, always in communities. We're working with frontline workers to deliver projects, often directly to householders themselves. And that's the important part. And the aim of all of those projects, of course, is to try to find solutions to fuel poverty, to try to tackle fuel poverty, to be part of the solution to fuel poverty. But we know that that can only be done if we're working in partnership with agencies like so many of you that are in the room this afternoon. What we hope to do is to deliver training, to offer advice and support, to increase the capacity of others to be able to take action in their communities, and hopefully along the way do some innovating and learning about what are the best ways to try and make impact. Now, it's precisely that area of advice and support that we want to focus on in this session, because obviously we're experiencing a crisis, the like of which I don't think any of us have really seen in our lifetimes. But our issue, the issue of poor and vulnerable householders, is not only still there. It's quite clear that that COVID amplifies inequality, that the experience of COVID is unequally felt in communities that might be more deprived or experiencing or lower income householders are experiencing things in a way, as I said, that's amplified above other households. What it also means that in terms of our approach to delivery, many of us have delivered our programs in the heart of communities, in communities. Fuel poor householders are not a self-recognizing group of people. We need to put together programs of work that bring solutions to those householders so that they can access them either themselves or through trusted third parties. That does involve working very closely in our communities. And of course, at the start of this crisis, none of us were able to do that. We're in a slightly different stage of the crisis now, clearly, but we're going into perhaps an even more challenging phase as we move into the winter, with all that involves. So what we want to do with this session really was to spend a bit of time hearing from you, hearing about how you have organised your services to be able to provide to low-income and vulnerable householders, to find out what lessons you've been learning about what need is like as you respond to those services, to those needs right now. And in order to help us do that, we've got, I've invited 4 speakers to join us from at the start. We're going to talk to us actually quite briefly about what their organisation does and how they've responded. I'm going to say a little bit about how NEA has done the same from our own point of view. And after we've heard from our 4 speakers, we'll have about 10 minutes or so in the group to have a quick Q&A session. But when I say Q&A session, I mean, I think what I'm also sort of suggesting is that we just want to hear from you as well. We want to hear your experiences as well from your organizations. After we've done that, we're going to, because there's a lot of us in the room, there's 53 at the moment, and there might be more joining us. I'm going to ask my colleagues to magically divide us into groups. I'm going to divide into 3 groups, and in those 3 groups, I'll set up those kind of facilitated sessions just before we go into them and what it is that we hope to address. And then we'll come back together again towards the end of the session and just do some summarizing. Now, the session, I think on, I'm not entirely sure, I think we've kind of booked to go until 3:30. We're a bit elastic in terms of how we do it, because what I suggest we do is we'll extend the session from 3 on to about 3:10. We'll come back together again about 3:10 and hopefully summarize in the last 10 or 15 minutes. But you know, obviously we'll take the time that we need to go through and do justice to the topic at hand. Okay, I think that's probably all that I need to do to set things up just now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to some colleagues who've, I'm very pleased, have agreed to speak to us this afternoon. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Emily Thompson, who's Director of Climate Change and Fuel Poverty at Groundwork Yorkshire. And Emily, can you just tell us a little bit about how Groundwork Yorkshire have been responding in the current crisis?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Peter. I think the major problems we've come across have been in the way we've had to adapt our service to meet the need. So our Green Docs programme has been operating for about 10 years nationally. So my colleague Ross will speak about the London situation as well. We provide in-the-home advice to people at risk of fuel poverty. So the bulk of our service is going into someone's property, sitting with them, going through energy bills, going through the situation, their income, and then fitting measures within the property to help them reduce their energy consumption. So as part of that, there's an awful lot of tailored advice that you give to a person dependent on their situation and their circumstances. So it's a valuable service, but obviously one that during a pandemic is completely impossible to deliver. So at the start of the lockdown, we moved immediately to delivering a telephone advice only service. Now, we did have to furlough staff because we weren't quite sure of the impact that was going to have on our services. So that was with a reduced capacity. The advice that we were giving was very similar to what we would normally give to householders, but tailored to the immediate situation. So it was helping people deal with the immediate issues of energy supply, how to deal with billing and debt and meter connections, ensuring that people could keep the lights on and deal with energy issues. A significant amount of time was spent supporting people to access prepayment meter top-ups, because whilst energy companies were very supportive during this period, actually a lot of people didn't know how to access that support and didn't know that it was even available. So we spent a considerable amount of time assisting people with that. And then there was obviously things like emergency and broken heating, hot water and gas issues that people have. And we continue to provide things like assisting people with signing up for priority services registers, dealing with referrals on for income maximisation and debt advice, and then helping people as best we could to deal with using meters and heating controls within the property. We did also within the Leeds area manage one of the coronavirus hubs in South Leeds. So we were also getting people phoning into the service for wider advice around accessing food and prescription services. So we were dealing with a wide variety of other issues that wouldn't normally come to our service, which is purely for fuel poverty support. But that did also mean that we were coming into contact with people who wouldn't normally access help around energy and bills that they struggle with. There were people who suddenly found themselves in crisis who wouldn't typically be our normal customer base. So a lot of the phone calls, we typically spend about an hour to an hour and a half within a property, but a good chunk of that is fitting measures as well as giving the advice. We were finding that we were spending at least 45 minutes to an hour and a half talking on the phone to people, trying to assist them. And a lot of the problems is that people are less able to convey the issues that they've got when they're talking to someone who's a complete stranger over the phone. It's less personal. And sometimes some of the issues that you would typically come up against were just not being drawn out over a conversation on the phone. So for example, if you're in a property, it's really easy to identify if there's damp and condensation issues in that property, but actually would someone really tell you that on a conversation over the phone to someone who they don't recognise? In Leeds, we had a lot of conversations with the welfare support team because we have a good, strong relationship with them, and we took on managing some of their welfare support calls. So throughout the first 4 weeks, we took on income and distributed that in small cash payments to people who were phoning into the service. So the welfare support team is effectively passing on their referrals because they had such a volume of calls coming in that they couldn't deal with it. So we distributed just short of £10,000 in small cash payments to householders. We also applied for the Energy Redresses COVID Fuel Voucher Scheme funding, and I've also distributed another £7,000 to 115 households to enable them to continue to get energy. So I guess that is the major issue that came up right at the start of the pandemic, is people having access to energy when they were either shielding or felt like they needed to self-isolate and they couldn't leave their properties. It was going out and dealing with that for them. Now, one of the big issues we found was a lot of people aren't on smart meters, so they haven't got an easy way of being able to deal with that themselves. So it was literally going out and collecting in a socially distant way, top-up cards, and being able to physically go out and top those up. So it's quite time-consuming for a service to be able to do that on behalf of householders. It's certainly much more time-consuming than we would normally have to deal with. I guess as we're looking forward to the winter period, the summer has been incredibly busy for us, and this is typically it's not quiet, but it's a sort of a down period in the year. We would normally expect to be much quieter than we have been. So we're gearing up for the fact that actually this could be one of our busiest winter periods, much in excess of what we normally have. Typically in a year, we get 2,000 to 2,500 visits that we go out and do right across the Yorkshire area. We've already supported 600 people, 650 people throughout the summer, which is our quiet period. So I'm expecting that we're going to exceed that number over the winter. So we've put in place some really detailed policies to enable us to go out and do home visits where we can, where it's acceptable through government guidelines and where there's no specific local restrictions in place, so that we can go and visit people in their home and provide limited advice in a socially distant way, so that householders who struggle to access a telephone service for whatever reason, whether that's language issues or not feeling confident talking to somebody on the telephone, so that we can still make sure that we can meet their needs. And of course, actually during the winter period, some of the biggest issues are the fact that your house is cold and there's draft coming in, and we just need to make sure that we are making houses energy efficient as well. And I guess we're conscious that prepayment issues are going to be some of the big issues going on throughout the winter as well. So we need to make sure that we've still got access to funding to be able to distribute that to householders. That probably covers everything from me.
Okay, that's great, Emily. Thanks very much. So I was going to move on to your colleague, Ross Brown, who's a senior project officer for groundwork. You're in groundwork in London, Ross, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So yeah, I mean, really similar service to what Emily delivers, and yeah, really similar issues that we've faced as well. And just a bit about the impact that we've made since lockdown started, or since March. So we've delivered 950 telephone or video consultations. We've delivered 138 deliveries of small measures that we're asking residents to install themselves. We've saved over £22,000 for residents, helping them switch energy provider, and we've signed up 442 people to the Priority Services Register. So, I won't repeat what Emily said about certain things, but just some extra bits. Gathering referrals, I think, has been more difficult, although there's more people in need. Finding them is difficult, especially in summer, where we would do a huge bulk of our events, meeting residents and households in need. But frontline training has been more successful than our customer outreach. So we've done a weekly drop-in frontline training for anyone to join, and then we've been doing bespoke frontline training sessions for generally housing associations and local councils that we work with. Yeah, I think especially during lockdown, less so now. We were finding that people weren't really interested in speaking about energy usage when their bigger problems were money or food or medication. So what we found was that we were helping people in ways that we weren't normally before we were able to kind of start to speak to them about what we specialize in. And you know, it was using our network of councils and onward referrals to get them the help they need before we could speak to them about energy, which is really interesting. Yeah, I think the effectiveness of the service is always a bit of a concern, because speaking to people on the phone, or a stranger on the phone for an hour, is just not as effective as a face-to-face interaction. So what we have been trying to do is introduce video calls so that we can get, you know, non-verbal cues back into the consultations, and we've also been able to support residents using three-way video calls with British sign interpreters, which is really interesting. And I think, yeah, the fact that we're able to now do contact-free deliveries of small measures to the residents is really good, because it gives our green doctors and the residents a chance to follow up. We can ask questions and yeah, answer any questions that they might have afterwards. But yeah, what we have found is that the calls are much more effective than we anticipated, and that we have been identifying the most in need at the moment, and that the impact that we've been making has been really meaningful.
Great, that's fantastic, Ross. So thanks very much to Emily and Ross. We've heard how groundwork, and obviously primarily the Green Doctor scheme that I think many of us know about, has had to adapt and respond since the crisis broke and lockdown obviously was originally introduced. I'm going to quickly move on to Alex Warren from the WISE Group. Alex is the Strategic Development Director at the WISE Group. And Alex, I'm going to invite you just to say a few words about how the WISE Group have responded and reconfigured during the recent period.
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks to Peter and Danny and the team for having me. The WISE Group is a social enterprise focused on lifting people out of poverty. We support people through numerous different ways, mainly at significant scale, through employment and employment support, reducing reoffending through mentoring people coming out of the justice system. We provide skills and training, but most significantly for today, we tackle fuel poverty at scale. We deliver in Scotland and in the northeast of England predominantly at the moment. In Scotland, we deliver the Home Energy Scotland service on behalf of the Scottish Government, which is the approved impartial advice service for householders, communities in terms of energy, fuel poverty support. And on the back of that, over the last sort of 12, 13 years, we've also built bespoke in-home services where we go to the lengths that, very similar to what Emily and Ross have just been talking about, you know, that intensive support that people really do need to get to the bottom of their issues when it comes to fuel poverty and energy spend in particular. And the impact, you know, I can't reiterate what you said about, you know, the impact of being in the home and the effectiveness that can have on the service. Just to give you an idea of scale, I mean, we helped about 30,000 people last year through our work in terms of energy and fuel poverty. Savings of just over £1 million on that. We're also involved in some of the crisis support across Scotland. We've got a big piece of work in the Energy Redress Fund around the fuel vouchers, about £300,000 of vouchers on that approach. The two things I wanted to quickly talk about today was how and who in terms of our response to COVID. How we did it, just like, again, like Emily talked about, we overcame the delivery challenges ourselves by switching to a remote delivery. We've got a strong technology platform. We use that. We've got contact center software. We brought in video calls. We did all of that. So from a business sense, we've coped fine. But I suppose my focus here is about what it means to the customers who we support, because that's the important thing I think we've got to be continuously looking at. One of the reasons our services have built up to the scale that they are is because customers regularly tell us their preference. They'd like to be helped out in the home, particularly with complex issues. And the nature of the things that we help people with is complex. It's personal, it takes time, and we have to build up trust. And that's a really important thing. Ross made that point before. It's quite easy to have a conversation with someone on the phone, but that building up of trust is really important. When we ask people about their preferences for accessing support, we generally find people opt for the support coming to them, being in the home. So over time, we've built and developed our services, over the past decade or more, based on this customer need. And they've been phenomenally successful and impactful. I'm sure most of the people on this section today have got similar things that they could talk about too. But the world shifted, and during the pandemic, and the nature of the services has rightfully changed, in terms of safety. But I suppose my question is about what this has meant for fuel poverty services, because we can't freely expect to be able to go and visit people in their homes now. At the moment, remote delivery is the norm for most organisations, but we need to keep building on that insight from our customers. At the Wise Group, we're still delivering high volumes of support to fuel poor customers, albeit remotely at the moment, and we're good at that. But how about the future? Along with colleagues, I keep being involved in conversations about blended models, remote delivery, and some in-home, some remote, some community-based. But for me, the important thing is about individual preferences have changed across our customer base as well, influenced by government restrictions, policy, or advice, or personal experience of people that have been impacted by COVID. We now live in a world where there's people, we have people who believe in face masks and people who don't. What about those who can't get online, and those who don't want to access support remotely or don't trust it? And this is going to be blurred further by the onset of more local lockdowns or, national lockdowns, depending on what happens as the country, remains on top of trying to keep control of the cases. I think all of this is going to be considered in our planning, when we think about our approaches to tackling fuel poverty. Because my view is we can't just sit and wait for it to get back to the way it was. So how we deliver fuel poverty services now and in the future is critical. And, particularly putting that into the context of the impact of COVID. I think it's stated in one of the briefs for this session that we know the best protection from COVID is not to be poor. Lowest paid are the hardest hit. I don't know if anyone managed to make this morning's session with Lindsay Judge from the Resolution Foundation, but if you can, go and watch it on the catch-up, because the information she presented on the impacts of COVID and different demographics was stark. But what can we expect? Unemployment. Conservative estimates put it at 10% in quarter 2 of this year, from record low unemployment to record high. 9.6 million jobs furloughed, 3.5 million people to face unemployment. Piece of research I saw this morning from Heriot-Watt University estimates just in the Trussell Trust Food Bank network, they'll give out 6 emergency food packages every minute this winter, 60% up on last year. So all of this will see a massive spike in the number of people experiencing squeezed household incomes. We know that levels of fuel poverty and the increase in people struggling with their energy bills and other costs will skyrocket. Those people are the people that we serve, that need our help. And again, it makes another point. It doesn't take a genius to point out that we've seen COVID span spring and summer, and a relatively warm one too. I say that in Scotland, it's been quite a nice summer. Now the test really begins when it comes to fuel poverty. The number of people who will need our help will continue to rise rapidly as it gets older. And then how do we get ourselves heard amongst the other priorities? Re-employment, housing costs, food emergencies. We've got to come together and scale up, collaborate, and deliver these programs and have a lasting impact. And then coming back to the remote delivery aspect, it's not all, I don't want to make the point that remote delivery is anyway negative or inferior to supporting in the home. It absolutely has its place. You think about the fact you can do more. You can help far larger numbers of people than a traditional in-home delivery method when it's blended right. We can deliver at greater scale, we can deliver more efficiently and effectively and break down barriers. One of those barriers being geography. No longer is travel time or travel cost a real barrier to supporting people. But for many, this is a big shift in delivery. And how do we do it? Who pays for that? If you've not got the technology infrastructure, how do you get that? Are the funders that we work with on these programs, are they aware of this? They're cognizant of the issues around the shift? My second point that I want to briefly cover as well is about who we target. In terms of age range, the general trends and the age demographics from our delivery puts the majority in the sort of 50 plus bracket. Latest research shows that 18 to 24-year-olds are the hardest hit group from COVID. How do we respond to this collectively through our delivery? This is a group who'll tend to have a propensity for remote delivery. That's one thing we know. What about housing tenure? You look at evidence around housing costs. Those who own with a mortgage have found it easier to get to make savings during the COVID crisis with mortgage holidays, etc. Renters have found it far more difficult. Private rented sector is predominantly one of the hardest to reach in terms of fuel poverty support and energy advice. And they've struggled more to reduce their costs. On that vein, we've just launched a new program with a private rented provider, looking at specifically tackling that issue, which is, I think is crucial. So my brief input here, hopefully it highlights a few considerations and things that, more importantly, it poses a few questions that we're looking at, but hopefully everyone else involved in the world of tackling fuel poverty is thinking about, which is how do we deliver for maximum impact? How do we tailor this in terms of people's preferences and those safety considerations? And then who should we target? Has our key demographic changed, and do we understand that? I've had some conversations with colleagues recently. It's elderly versus young, and how do we focus our support in the right area? So a quick ramble through things from me, but I'm leaving it there with a few questions. So hopefully that's useful for sparking some debate later on in the session.
Thanks very much, Alex. Not a ramble at all. That was excellent. And I think, you've kind of really summarized so many of the issues, and thanks very much for setting up actually in that way. So many of the issues that I think we want to try and address during this workshop. I know that we'll not be able to address all of them, but I think, you've certainly set the stall out as to many of the things that we need to be thinking about. And I'm very, very taken with your comment. We can't just sit back and wait for things to get back to how it was, because that's not the way it will be from here on in. We are looking at a tsunami of debt to deal with. We've got the end of furlough just around the corner, with what that means for unprecedented 1980s style rises on unemployment, as we were talking about this morning. So it is a bleak picture that we're looking at. But obviously, what we're here to do is to just talk about how we can make our imprint on trying to find some of those solutions for our clients. Now, finally, before I just say a few words, I'd like to pass over to Lee. Lee Healy is the Managing Director of Income Max CIC. Thanks for joining us, Lee. And of course, I understand that as an organisation, you're very kind of used to doing the kind of telephone advice side of things. But I just wondered if you, introduce you and perhaps say a few things about what you've been doing on a very specific kind of fuel poverty kind of project of work that you've been working on as well.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone. Really inspired by what everyone's been saying. And just to echo, really, I think that the theme that I get is how intense it's been, not just for our citizens, but also for the advice services and the organisations that are there to try and support what we know are long-standing issues. The issues of fuel poverty, low income, indebtedness, warmth being an issue, energy being an issue for families across the UK. We know, I think, what COVID has done has just absolutely confirmed what I think professionals working in this sector have always known. Incomes are vital. We saw the government step up in relation to incomes. warmth and energy is vital. You think about trying to, teach your kids from home without having a decent source of energy and having a warm home. I think all of us are thanking our lucky stars that this happened in the summer, and we had a warm, plenty of sun going about. I think all of us are bracing ourselves for the winter and what kind of effect this might be as everything kind of COVID seems to be building up again. And obviously we don't know what the economic impacts are going to be. And just that survival is vital. I think there's no two ways about it. There's a very human story to what the COVID crisis is all about, I think, really. We've kind of reconnected with communities, but also reconnected with each other as human beings. But actually, we've realised that there's a lot of problems that we need to solve. And I think from an Income Max perspective, I feel really lucky that we're a remote organisation, so we deliver everything over the telephone already. So we're celebrating our 10th birthday. We've found about £24 million worth of new income. We know already that billions goes unclaimed every year, and we know that really it's really hard to survive without income. How did we respond to the COVID crisis? Well, we got everyone working from home, and thankfully, obviously, we had the systems to keep everyone on the telephones and get going with that. We saw a big increase in referrals. Social media queries went through the roof. We were, directing everybody to the government schemes, from, the job retention schemes through to the self-employment schemes, and of course, things like universal credit. But there were some complex issues as well. There were things like universal credit and legacy benefits, the interaction between them and tax credits. Some real complex stuff that our citizens got caught up in well before that was all kind of scheduled to happen, So I think for me, the big themes really were it exacerbated all of these problems that we already knew existed, So I think certainly from a low income perspective, that's definitely the case. From a mental health perspective, we were involved in quite a lot of papers around people's mental health and how much that affected them. And we already know that there's a strong link between money and mental health, warmth and mental health. So let's just get that out there straight away. This is not just about, incomes and that kind of cold-blooded, hard money aspect. This is about people's lives. It's about both their mental health and, of course, probably their physical health as well, So and of course, that leads me on to something that I've been exploring quite a lot over the last few years, which is the effects of stress. And we know that obviously from a stress perspective, if you've got a cold home, if you can't feed the kids, if your benefits are not going in right, if you've got a low income, if you've been let go from your job or made redundant, this causes huge problems with stress. And I think we're all sort of waking up to the issues that that stress cause on us as human beings and UK citizens, Okay, so I'm painting a bleak picture, but I think already I'm sort of always buoyed by the passion that everybody has for making sure that we just kept going as advice services. So we partnered with Agility Eco. We've got a new Connect for Help program, which is all about delivering remotely. So it's well worth checking that out, connectforhelp.org.uk. There's a telephone number that people can ring and a form or an email that they can send to get the help with advice and energy bills and funding for, the energy support that they need. So things like that. It was great to see grant making charities and businesses stepping up during this time, because we're going to need more of that. There's no two ways about it that the advice sector is going to need resources to cope with demand. And my good friend Kathy's on the line today, and she's a debt advisor. I've got the greatest respect. I've known Kathy for such a long time, and I'm sure she'll agree with me. I think that indebtedness is a problem that's being stored up, because at the moment creditors are kind of doing things to try and support people. You've got those furlough schemes like Peter mentioned. Where are we headed with debt? I mean, the Money and Pension Service have a whole 10-year strategy around financial well-being and debt. But I'm a little bit worried about that. I mean, from local authorities trying to chase rent and council tax arrears to creditors at some point wanting to claw back the money that they've lent out. There are some big issues lined up, I think, there. And of course, energy is a big part of that, especially if you're on a prepayment meter and you're trying to pay your debts at the same time, or if you just fall behind on your bill. Sometimes it can feel like there's no way back. So how do we respond even in a greater way? Well, I think, look, I just want to say that I had the greatest of respect and belief in human face-to-face services. It's why we partner with Agility Eco. We love the way they go into the community and deliver that and then refer into Income Max so we can do the money stuff remotely. But in the meantime, I think we've got to think on our feet and we've got to be agile. We've got to be flexible. And it sounds to me like everybody's been doing that. It's brilliant listening to Groundwork and the work that they've been doing. Alex's passion for this and really thinking about the bigger issues. We're looking at digital now, which is bizarre because I'm all about the human-centered. You know, I love conversations. It's what I'm doing. It's what we're all about. But actually, digital is something I think we'd be foolish not to be looking at as advice services. So for me, I think, you know, we've got to be looking at digital channels and how we can make that work in a human way as well. And if any of you guys have caught any of the chats and talks that I've been doing during this, I talk a lot about making sure that even if we go down the digital route, that we're thinking about the human and putting conversations at the heart of all that as well. And in the meantime, we make good old use of the telephone, good use of email, and we're just being flexible and adaptable, like I said. I think just to finish really, just on that partnership is still key. We want to make sure that we're all not working in silos and that we're all learning from each other. And because I think we've all got the end goal in sight, which is that we want our families in the UK to thrive. And I think if we keep that firmly as our end goal, then we can just get working on the journey and we can enjoy that process. So yeah, that's me. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Lee. I mean, we've heard from 4 excellent speakers who I think have not only described the very, very difficult, well, you know, we know it, the very, very difficult landscape that we're all working in, but how those challenges are currently being met whilst in no way being blind to some very, very serious challenges that we know are just around the corner. I just wanted to say something a little bit about what we do here at NEA. And I mentioned earlier that, you know, Danny and I lead the kind of operations part of what NEA does. What we did, which really just delivers a range of different projects, you know, funded through various different kind of strands. But about a year ago, we launched something called the Warm and Safe Homes Advice Service, which was really just a way of us kind of bringing together all of those kind of services together under one kind of title to make it a bit easier for us to kind of get the message across to the communities that we were working with. The WASH service, which is its acronym, but basically Warm and Safe Homes Advice Service. It's a free and confidential advice services that we've been delivering to the householders that we work with, delivering advice on energy bills, on energy efficiency, on fuel debt, which is obviously one of the biggest issues that we've been dealing with, and also a benefit entitlement service, which also helps householders to make the claims, supports them in making the claims for those benefits to which they're entitled. So it's a service which basically advocates on behalf of householders, negotiates with suppliers where that's needed, supports householders with switching, offers kind of tailored energy efficiency based on household circumstances, but also makes sure that householders are able to claim their Warm Homes Discount rebate, that they get on the priority service register, helps with making trust funds as well for debt relief or for white goods. Increasingly, we found that we've been dealing with issues of water debt as well. And all of that has been delivered in a variety of methods, but essentially, whilst we launched a kind of a free phone service as an access point in, an awful lot of it was being delivered through engagement with communities directly. What we've had to do, obviously, is to adapt that to a telephone advice service in the last few months, which has been a challenge for us, but I think you know, the team have done brilliantly well in order to be able to do that. And expanded delivery in that sense. I think what we would say is that we're very aware that, and you know, I think we have to concede that phone lines can be a lifeline for those people that access them, and particularly when there is so little else, so few other ways of getting support at the moment. But we're also very aware that there are instances where the phone line service is limited in what it can do for people. It can't help people in some circumstances, in many circumstances. So our concern is, well, where are we missing? Where are we missing the opportunity to help householders that are in dire need? And what can we do in order to make sure that that we don't miss those householders. I mean, many of the challenges that all of the guys that have just spoken have mentioned, we would absolutely agree with. I mean, in terms of how important these services are, and I can only just talk from our experience of delivering ours. I mean, I can tell you that the financial gains for the last 6 months from that service, and it's not a massive service, you know, we've dealt with about 2,500, just more than 2,500 cases in the last 6 months, and that's a mixture of general energy advice, benefits advice, issuing top-ups for people as well. It's brought in about £2.4 million in terms of financial gains. Now, you know, these are significant sums for those householders that access the service. And so, you know, that's kind of what we've been finding, but it has undoubtedly, for all of us, been extremely difficult to adapt those services under these circumstances. And we've heard so much in the last half hour about what we think about the challenges going forward. Now, before we break off into our breakout groups, I just wanted to give us the opportunity, and I'm keeping an eye on the group chat, which, you know, obviously is a super big challenge to multitask, but I'm just kind of making sure that I am keeping on top of that as well. But I just wanted to make sure, were there any queries or questions or points that people wanted to raise whilst we're all in the room and we've got all of our speakers in the room? Just to follow on from the discussion that we've had, I will take us into our breakout sessions where I hope we can have a more of a facilitated discussion between each other. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to ask any questions or have any points made from the room generally. At this point, people who do speak will have to unmute, but let me just check whether there's anybody that wants to make any further points or ask any questions at this point. I've allowed a few minutes silence because, I don't know, the digital technology maybe has a delay on the line or something. Sorry, somebody was speaking.
No, it's only me. I was just going to say, Danielle from Manchester Citizens Advice made a really brilliant point around using video calls.
Yes.
And I think that's that kind of using technology wisely and also keeping it human as well. It's not going to fit and suit everybody, but at the moment, I think it's kind of just good to be flexible and adaptable and to do what we can. And if that works for someone, then I think that's a really good thing.
I was just going to ask, has anybody started trying to, because obviously a lot of the clients that we work with would be described as digitally excluded. But a lot of the organizations that we work with, we've kind of sought opportunities to do video chats and conference calls with groups. I see my colleague Rebecca is on the line. You've had some experience of doing that from our point of view, and there might be others in the room who kind of gone down the street as well. Just wondered if you had a couple of comments to make about how that's worked, whether that's been, you know.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's been quite a steep learning curve. Started off with doing some group sessions. So this has been kind of our bread and butter at this time of year normally is group sessions, some one-to-one support, but a lot of face-to-face work with groups of vulnerable people. And we didn't think that was really going to work until actually I was contacted by a group that I'd previously worked with who said, actually, can you talk to our group of refugees, because actually we're doing quite a lot of stuff online. I went, well, yeah, please, thank you, I'd love to do some of that, that's brilliant. It was challenging to start off with because of course everybody was accessing Zoom on their phones rather than on computers, so I hadn't been prepared for that, so I had to quickly do a bit of jiggering around of slides because it had been very interactive. Because obviously in a group setting it's usually pretty interactive and I'm usually chatting to people and things like that, so I had to quickly think on my feet and try and make it. Basically I just got them to shout at me for the first session because they couldn't do very much other than squiggle on their phones. But I've done several sessions with refugees since then, some with interpreters as well, which has been also quite hard work but fun. I've been asked some brilliant questions. Also, I've done a session with a stroke group as well, who I regularly see every year. And like I said, it's had its downsides, but actually, I think particularly with the stroke group, they were a lot more relaxed than they normally would be in a village hall type setting or wherever it was, because one of them had got the grandchildren playing in the background, the other one was like messing around with his dog, and they asked a lot more questions than they had done in previous sessions. So it was really interesting. Once they got they'd already been chatting for a bit, so they're all pretty laid back. The refugees, it was a little bit different because they were all a little bit shy to start talking, you know, because obviously a bit like this session, everybody's muted to start off with. So trying to get them to take mute off and talk to me was a little bit more challenging because I'm not being able to sit around and have a cup of tea and a biscuit with them. Brought my mug, so I am having a cup of tea with you. So it was, yeah, it was challenging, but most people stuck it out until the end. It's a little bit weird not always being able to see faces, because obviously people mute their videos sometimes because of their internet connection, and also because sometimes they don't want you to see where they live, which is fair enough. But otherwise, I found it really rewarding, and I've got some good cases to follow up afterwards as well, where people have contacted me afterwards and asked for additional help. So I'm really glad that we're carrying on doing this, and I've got some more hopefully lined up in the next couple of months as well. Fingers crossed. So if you hear of any groups in the southeast or London, or actually anywhere in the country, because I've ended up with refugee groups up north as well as down here in the south.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So there's discussion in the chat about how in Wales attend anywhere video calls are being trialed. Obviously, people are using WhatsApp, you know, the existent technology to speak directly to clients, which, you know, let's face it, previously we simply probably wouldn't have had the need to use, or wouldn't have thought to use. So people are adapting. Now, okay, were there any further questions that to put to any of the speakers before we move into our breakout groups? Because if not, otherwise I will suggest that we do that. Now, because the reason for the breakout groups obviously is that I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to have a bit of facilitated discussion. What I suggest we do is we take about 30 minutes to go through this. So that would take us to about 20 past, rather than 10 past as I said earlier. We'll give it to about 20 past. In just a minute, at the press of a button, we'll all be divided into groups. But my colleagues Lorraine Donaldson and Danny Buns will be facilitating this group. So I'll be doing the third. And I guess what we wanted to do with these sessions is everybody's had a chance to hear from four excellent presentations from our colleagues, but that's their perspective on how they've both adapted and how they see the challenges going forward. Excellently put as well, I think. What we wanted to give everybody a chance to discuss is, how have you been responding to the emerging challenges of COVID? How have you sought to overcome those challenges in order to be able to continue some kind of delivery for your clients? We also wanted to address, what lessons are we learning for ongoing delivery? And by ongoing delivery, I guess I mean kind of two things, if it's not too much of a challenge for us. One is the immediate terms, the challenges of the coming winter, with all that that entails, with all that we know about likely second spikes, likely regional or more localized lockdowns. What have we learned in the first part of this that might set us up for delivery in the second? But also, and again, I'm mindful of what Alex said, is that there is really no going back after all of this. What do we learn about moving into the longer term as we move out of this crisis from this type of delivery? And one of the things, and I think this is a challenge, I concede this, but one of the sort of challenges I'm putting to us all is this isn't a competition. That comment was made earlier this morning in terms of us, the services that we deliver to our households. We're not competing with each other. What we are doing is, in our own different ways, in our own different organizations, and through our own various different funding mechanisms, which I know have got, you know, kind of responsibilities to various different funders, but we're all trying to do much the same kind of thing for some very, very vulnerable householders. Is there anything that we can do that we learn out of this that enables us to better coordinate our services more directly and more effectively to householders? That's a challenge. It's always there, but I'm just putting out there as one of the things that we might want to consider in our discussion groups. Right, enough from me. Somebody's going to press a magic button. We're going to go into these discussion groups, and then we're all going to come back again at about 20 past, and we'll just do a summary at that point. So I'll hand over to my colleagues who can do this, I think.
I'm doing it just a second, Peter. And yeah,
Nina.
okay.
It's a lottery where you'll end up, by the way.
Except that I might move people when I see that I need to have you three in different rooms.
Ah.
Ah, yeah, just 1 second. Right, here we go.
Hoto, join your group. Right, I've just unmuted myself.